Every year, millions of people gather in specific, designated geographical locations across the globe to witness what they believe is a crack in the fabric of reality. They stand for hours under a blistering sun or in freezing rain, waiting for a statue to weep blood, a sun to dance in the sky, or an incurable disease to vanish at the touch of holy water. For the believer, these moments are the ultimate validation of their faith, a tangible, undeniable proof that the divine has broken through the veil of the material world. For the observer, it is something else entirely. It is a glimpse into a terrifying, hidden mechanism of the human mind. We like to believe that our eyes report reality to us with absolute objective clarity. We assume that if 1,000 people look at the same point in space and report seeing the exact same impossible event, it must have happened. But history, psychology, and neuroscience hide a much darker truth. The most famous miracles in human history were not suspensions of the laws of physics. They were something far more sophisticated. They were the tectonic movements of collective human psychology, where language, isolation, expectation, and fear align to override human perception entirely. Once you understand how these moments are actually manufactured inside the neural circuitry of a crowd, you begin to realize that the line between shared reality and total delusion is terrifyingly thin. And the most unsettling part is that the people who experience them are not lying. They are genuinely seeing something that isn't there. Consider the baseline narrative we are all taught to accept. In the official histories of major religious movements, miracles are treated as sudden, spontaneous interruptions of the ordinary. A small group of children in a remote village reports an apparition. A local religious figure exhibits strange physical phenomena. Word spreads organically. At first, the authorities are skeptical. They investigate, they test, they attempt to debunk the claims. But the crowd grows anyway. The sheer volume of witnesses becomes overwhelming. Tens of thousands of people arrive, and suddenly, a mass event occurs that defies conventional explanation. The institution, initially hesitant, eventually validates the event, building a shrine or a dogma around the location. This is the comforting, familiar structure of the miraculous. It frames the event as an objective truth that forced its way through human skepticism. It relies on a deeply embedded piece of human logic, the argument from consensus. Surely, we tell ourselves, 50,000 people cannot simultaneously suffer from the exact same hallucination. If an entire valley looks up and watches the sun spin, change colors, and plunge toward the earth, it cannot simply be a trick of the mind. This reliance on numbers is the foundation of institutional religious validation. It creates a psychological fortress. To question the miracle is to accuse a vast multitude of ordinary, honest people of being either fools or liars. And so, the narrative stands, undisputed for generations, woven into the cultural identity of entire civilizations. But if you step away from the theological framing and begin to analyze the environment where these events take place, a completely different pattern emerges. The investigation does not begin at the moment of the miracle. It begins months, sometimes years, beforehand. It begins with the architecture of isolation. Almost every major mass miracle in history occurs in an environment of extreme social, economic, or existential stress. The individuals who trigger these movements are almost always marginalized, frequently children living in deeply traditional, highly superstitious rural communities. They are saturated from birth in a specific linguistic and visual vocabulary. They do not have a neutral framework for interpreting the world. When a child in a 20th century European village experiences a moment of acute psychological dissociation or neurological absence, they do not describe it in medical terms. They use the only language available to them, the language of the local faith. The story begins as a whisper, and this is where the viral nature of human belief takes over. In a closed community experiencing trauma, whether from war, poverty, or cultural shift, a narrative of divine intervention acts as a psychological lifeline. It satisfies a desperate, collective need for meaning. The human brain is a prediction machine. It abhors randomness. When faced with systemic suffering, the brain will actively seek out signs of order, justice, or cosmic attention. The whisper of a miracle provides exactly that. It creates a sudden, intense focus of collective attention. As word spreads, a unique psychological pressure cooker is constructed. People do not travel to these sites to analyze data. They travel there because they want to feel something. They walk for days, fasting, praying, singing in unison. By the time they arrive at the designated field or hillside, their bodies are depleted and their minds are in a state of hyperarousal. They have entered a distinct neurological condition known as hypersuggestibility. When you place tens of thousands of individuals in this exact physiological state, sharing the same intense expectation, you are no longer dealing with a collection of independent minds. You are dealing with a single, highly volatile psychological organism. The transformation of this organism is governed by the laws of emotional contagion. In a dense crowd, emotional states spread exactly like a physical virus, but at a fraction of the speed. When we are surrounded by people who are experiencing intense fear, grief, or ecstasy, our mirror neurons fire in sympathy. Our heart rates synchronize. Our respiratory patterns align. The individual ego begins to dissolve into the collective identity of the group. In this state, the brain's critical thinking centers, the prefrontal cortex, are effectively taken offline, bypassed by the ancient, emotional survival mechanisms of the limbic system. It is within this state of collective trance that the miracle finally manifests. But it rarely happens as an explicit, structured event. It begins with a single exclamation. Someone cries out, someone points at the sky, or at a statue, or at the horizon. In a state of hypersuggestibility, that single voice acts as a powerful psychological command. The crowd does not look up to evaluate if the sun is moving. They look up expecting to see it move. The human visual processing system is remarkably easy to disrupt, especially under physical strain. If you stare at a bright object like the sun or a light source for even a few seconds, the photoreceptors in your retina become fatigued. The brain, struggling to process the overstimulated visual data, begins to create illusions of movement, color shifts, and afterimages. Under normal circumstances, a person would realize they are experiencing a standard optical effect. But inside the crowd, surrounded by thousands of weeping, praying people, that optical fatigue is instantly interpreted as a cosmic event. The collective confirmation bias is absolute. If the person to your left is crying because the sun is turning blue, and the person to your right is on their knees because the sky is shaking, your brain will literally alter your conscious perception to match the group consensus. It is a survival mechanism. To see something different from the tribe is to be cast out into the terrifying void of isolation. And this is where the story becomes dangerous. The miracle is almost never left to exist merely as a beautiful, fleeting memory. It is immediately weaponized by institutional power. Religious institutions are fundamentally managers of narrative. They understand, either intuitively or explicitly, that an unmanaged miracle is a threat to their authority. If the divine can speak directly to a group of peasants in a field without the mediation of the priesthood, the hierarchy becomes obsolete. Therefore, the institution must step in to capture, regulate, and codify the event. The process is remarkably consistent across centuries. First, the institution establishes control over the physical space. The field is cordoned off. A shrine is planned. The visionaries are isolated, questioned, and often placed under the care of religious handlers. Their descriptions of the event, which are initially chaotic, contradictory, and deeply human, are systematically edited over time. The language is cleaned up. The theological rough edges are smoothed out until the children's testimony perfectly aligns with established institutional doctrine. Once the narrative is stabilized, the true miracle begins: the economic and political exploitation. The site of the mass hysteria is converted into a pilgrimage destination. An infrastructure of devotion is constructed, generating vast amounts of revenue and cultural capital for the institution. The original psychological trauma of the crowd is replaced by a polished, sanitized, multi-million-dollar industry of faith. The miracle becomes a permanent monument to institutional legitimacy. It is used to validate political regimes, to suppress dissent, and to bind the collective identity of a nation to the authority of the church. The raw, chaotic energy of human hysteria is successfully tamed and converted into the most stable currency on earth: absolute certainty. When we look back at these historical events, it is easy to adopt a tone of intellectual superiority. We tell ourselves that these were simply the delusions of superstitious people from a bypassed era, that modern, rational humanity is immune to such primitive psychological manipulation. But that assumption is perhaps the greatest delusion of all. The neurological architecture that allowed for the mass hysterias of the past has not changed. The human brain still possesses the exact same vulnerability to emotional contagion, the same desperate need for shared meaning, and the same tendency to alter its perception of truth to align with the group. The only thing that has changed is the technology we use to gather. Today, we no longer need to walk to a remote hillside in Europe or South America to enter the crowd. We live inside a permanent digital crowd. The online spaces we inhabit every day are specifically engineered to maximize emotional arousal, anxiety, and hypersuggestibility. The algorithms that dictate what we see do not prioritize objective reality. They prioritize engagement, which is fueled almost entirely by collective fear and tribal outrage. We watch as narratives spread across the digital landscape with the exact same speed and trajectory as the medieval rumors of weeping statues. We see groups of people, numbering in the millions, looking at the exact same set of facts and reporting completely incompatible realities. They are convinced they are witnessing hidden conspiracies, existential threats, or societal miracles that are invisible to the uninitiated. They point at the screen, and because thousands of others are pointing and crying out in unison, their brains perform the exact same trick. Their perception conforms to the consensus of their chosen digital tribe. The modern political rally, the viral internet subculture, the echo chambers of social media, these are the fields of Fatima and the caverns of Lourdes updated for the 21st century. The true horror of history's mass miracles is not that humanity was once easily fooled. It is that reality itself is a fragile, collaborative construct. We do not experience the world as it is. We experience the world as our culture, our anxieties, and our peers tell us it should be. The mind does not look for truth, it looks for safety. And in the human psyche, there is no greater safety than losing yourself entirely in the certainty of the crowd. When you stand alone in the quiet of your own mind, away from the screens, the voices, and the collective chants, you are forced to confront a deeply unsettling question. How many of your most cherished convictions, your deepest certainties, and your profoundest experiences were actually yours? And how many were simply the echoes of a crowd you didn't even realize you had joined?